Hello.
Call to order the SACOG meeting for transportation Thursday, April 3rd at 10:04 a.m. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Director Boomgarden will be leading us in the pledge.
Pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. All right.
Chair Lauren, would you like me to go ahead and take roll call?
Yes, please call the roll.
Thank you. Director Boomgarden,
Here.
Branscombe,
Yes, ma'am.
Chapman, Clerici is joining us remotely.
I am here.
Thank you. Early,
Here.
Jennings absent, Jones absent, Sander.
Here.
Vice Chair Desmond.
Here.
Vice Chair Howdesheld.
Here.
Chair Lauren,
Here.
and ex officio Director Aceves.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we open public comment for items that aren't on the agenda today, I'd like to just review the disclosures. Directors will disclose any item in which they have a conflict of interest under state law and acknowledge whether they will recuse from that item. Among other state laws, the Levine Act may require recusal on items involving a contract or entitlement where a campaign donor is a participant. With that, it brings us to public comment for items that aren't on the agenda. And I have some speakers that have already turned in slips. So let's begin with David Schwigel. Welcome.
Good morning, SACOG Transportation Committee. My name is David Schwegel with an update on high-speed rail, a project that has a funding shortfall of $7 billion plus an additional $4 billion clawback from the federal government. Congressman Kevin Kiley is having the FBI investigate the project, and he is passing legislation so that the project will not be eligible for any more federal funding. The root cause is Tudor Perini, Zachary, Parsons, Dragados, and Flatiron failed to disclose to the High-Speed Rail Authority that the High-Speed Rail Authority needs to acquire 100% of the right-of-way before design-build work can proceed. They did that because they didn't want to get their payment delayed by 3 years, and they wanted to be able to make $5 billion as opposed to $1.5 billion on the project. So they put their own financial interests ahead of protecting the public health, safety, and welfare of the California residents in direct violation of the State of California Professional Engineers Act. I'm going to be working with the Board for Professional Engineers, Land Surveyors, and Geologists, and all 121 members of the California State Legislature to get the California business licenses revoked for those 5 design builders due to their gross mismanagement of the project. So in a nutshell, $7 billion in damages. On a more positive note, let's talk about our own region. I was with Precision Civil Engineering, the regional consultant on Merced to Sacramento. We had a skinny $1 million contract. Our predecessor, AECOM, spent $7.5 million drawing lines on a map showing the train taking out miles of new housing in Manteca and Galt. What we did at Precision Civil Engineering is we did low-level field investigations throughout the whole region to determine which alignments will work, which alignments will not work, and we also came up with our own alignments, including the alignment that ACE is going to be using when they come up here to Midtown next year. What should we do? Keep an eye on Brightline West between Rancho Cucamonga and Las Vegas. They have a great track record of success in Florida, and they plan to be up and running just before the Olympics, if not after the Olympics. And then we want to see if they can build Merced to Redding with intermediate stations in Elk Grove, Sacramento, Roseville, Lincoln, and Yuba City / Marysville. Keep an eye on the transit-oriented development potential. In closing, high-speed rail is an extraordinary opportunity for the state of California if and only if it is done right. So keep an eye on these projects, and let's make sure that moving forward, we hold our consultants accountable for performing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwegel. The SACOG now welcomes Dale Summerfield. I said your last name wrong. Sorry about that. I know you'll correct it.
No problem. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, committee members. My name is Dale Summersell. I'm a senior associate with Califranc Consulting, the state's largest grant writing firm. I'm a resident of Yolo County, and some of you may know I am a long city staff member for many cities, including my latest tenure with the City of Davis as the Parks and Community Services Director, as well as the grant administrator. While working for the City of Davis, I was a lead staff person submitting and receiving numerous grants, which were awarded for projects for city infrastructure and projects for the community. This included transportation, cybersecurity, police, parks infrastructure, and climate change. Califranc Consulting has been in existence for 21 years, and our grant writers have written over 1,600 grants that have been funded to our clients. Our team has brought in $1.6 billion to a variety of community projects and programs. Califranc Consulting has contracts with more than 130 public agencies across the state to perform grant writing services and grant reporting services with public agencies, including cities, counties, school districts, and special districts. Our local clients include the City of Davis, Vallejo, Vacaville, Yolo County, and Woodland and Winters Unified School District. As you know, with the current and changing complex economic times, it is imperative to look at your various types of grant funding that you have and braid monies as best you can to leverage your budget and programs for your projects. Leveraging your monies and seeking grants is consistent with your vision statement, a vibrant and thriving Sacramento region, and all of your mission. In your mission statement, SACOG convenes and connects the region to advance equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. I have left the clerk with some information, a card, as well as information for myself. Please do not hesitate to call me if you'd like me to assist you with this body, as well as the communities that you serve. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dale. This brings us to the consent calendar part of the agenda. I do have one correction. There's an error in the notes. It says that Kudashel called the meeting to order, but I was here. Next time.
I did it at the February meeting, and they just got carried over to the March meeting. So with,
We're cool.
we're cool.
Yeah.
So with a correction to the March 6th meeting, that Chair Loren opened the meeting Do we take public comment on consent
No.
calendar? Yes.
Oh, I do. All right. So we're asking to approve the minutes and approve fiscal year 2024-25 transit operator projections for low carbon transit operations funds. Do we have public comment on our consent calendar?
There's no public comment.
Any online?
No public comment online.
Seeing no public comment, I would like to ask for a motion.
Early moves.
Early.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Early, a second by Desmond. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you. Director Baumgarten,
Yes.
Branscombe,
Yes.
Chapman, Clarici,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Jennings absent, Jones absent, Sander,
Aye.
Vice Chair Desmond.
Aye.
Vice Chair Haudashelt
Aye.
and Chair Lauren.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the action area of our agenda. And item number 3, Senate Bill 125 Transit Program Funding Plan and Updated SACOG Guidelines will be presented by Leo Torres.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, directors. My name is Leo Torres. I'm a transportation analyst here at SACOG. And the item before you today is related to the Senate Bill 125 Transit Program. One more. There we go. All right. So staff is seeking action on 2 things today. First, to recommend approval of a funding plan option for year 2 and year 3 of the Senate Bill 125 Transit Program. And second, and related to that funding plan, is to recommend adoption of accountability measures as part of updated regional guidelines for this program. So I'll be providing some background on Senate Bill 125, and then I'll go over those funding plan options and the So in the 2023 budget, the state provided transit with a $5.1 billion infusion through the existing Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program, or TIRCIP, and a newly established Zero Emission Transit Capital Program. Using a formula, SACOG is estimated to receive a total of $238 million in funding for the 4-county planning area of Sacramento, Sutter, Yolo, and Yuba counties over the 4 years of the life of the program. So while both programs can fund transit capital projects, the legislature's priority for this funding is actually to support transit operations. And that's because it's meant to serve as stopgap emergency funding to prevent transit agencies from cutting service while they work on long-term solutions to address rising costs coming out of the pandemic. The funding is also meant to prioritize the availability of transit for those who need it most, and for transit agencies who carry a large share of the region's riders. So this is the state's approach to the transit fiscal cliff, or the transit fiscal crisis, or really an operating budget shortfall or deficit, which is an issue facing transit agencies nationwide, as federal aid that helped support transit in the depths of the pandemic is fully expended or close to being fully expended, and other funding sources, including fare revenues, have not kept up with the rising costs of labor, materials, and inflation. So the Senate Bill 125 Transit Program is effectively an extension of that federal aid, and it's been critical to keeping the trains and buses running in the region and facilitate the growth that we've seen in ridership since the lows of the pandemic. So it's always helpful to understand how our peers, both within and outside the region, are approaching this program. So again, this is state funding, and so El Dorado and Placer County receive their portion of the funding directly from the state, and they allocate the funds based on their local needs. So the key takeaway here, the biggest difference, is that their transit agencies are not projecting an operating deficit or that fiscal cliff, and so they're using the funding to accelerate their zero emission transition and support other priority capital projects. Peers across the state are kind of using that same framework with this program. So using the funding to support transit operations if they're facing a near-term fiscal cliff, and funding local priority capital projects with the remainder of the funds, or using all the funds for capital if they're not projecting operating deficits. The major takeaway here is that when we include the funding options I'll present shortly, SACOG's Senate Bill 125 funding split going to operations to maintain service is really estimated to be the most aggressive out of all the peers. So the program, again, provides the 4-county planning area with $238 million in funding, split as shown on the table. It's important to note here that in year 2 and year 3, we have roughly half the amount of funding that we had in year 1. And in year 4, we only have about $15 million. So there are some tough decisions in front of you today to attempt to balance the needs of the region's transit agencies with the funding we have available and the program's main objective of maintaining service. The California State Transportation Agency also requires SACOG to report and allocate interest earned on the funds. And so far the funds in SACOG accounts have earned about $500,000, which are included in year 2 for both funding plan options. And just as a quick refresher, last April, the SACOG board allocated that full $114 million from year 1 to address operating, capital, and planning needs in the 4-county RTPA. And so in alignment with the intent of the funding, Sacramento Regional Transit received the majority of the funding to address their operating deficit of about $60 million, as well as some capital projects, and to fund a comprehensive operational analysis that's underway and seeks to address that long-term financial sustainability that's needed. The remainder of the funding was distributed to Yolo Transportation District to address an operating deficit of about $3 million, as well as to fund a short-range transit plan that's also underway. Yuba Sutter Transit received 10.2 to support their next generation transit facility, and then SACOG received its allowable share of the funding for administering the program, and as well as to fund a long-term financial plan for all the transit agencies in that planning area. I'll note that the $98.3 million figure there for SAC-RT does include a $6 million allocation for a capital project that they've asked us to repurpose to support their year 2 funding request. And so in total for year 2, there is about $56.7 million available to allocate, and that includes that interest earned I mentioned. So we worked with all of the operators in the 4-county planning area over the past few months to discuss their needs in multiple one-on-one discussions. And we also presented these 2 options at the Transit Coordinating Committee in February for feedback and in March for a final update. So we received a total of about $72 million in funding requested, the majority to address Sacramento Regional Transit's anticipated $51 million operating deficit. We also received about $17 million worth of capital project requests, as well as some requests to restore and expand service, which again resulted in some unfunded needs. So here are the 2 options. Option A is really focused solely on closing those operating deficits to maintain service and prevent any service cuts. Any funding left over is essentially rolled over to the last year of the program. And so this option is kind of stretching the funding as much as possible based on the financial projections that we were provided from the operators. And that's really to fulfill the main objective of the program, which is to prevent service from being cut. I'll also note that year 3 is preliminary for both options. We will revisit the plan for year 3 next year as budget conditions change and hopefully improve. So option B really does everything that option A does, right? Addresses those operating deficits. But instead of rolling over those leftover funds to the last year of the program, this option allocates them to Yolo Transportation District for some of their capital needs. I noted earlier that we received about $17 million in capital project requests, some of which we deem critical to maintaining existing service levels. And so in alignment with the objectives of the program, we drafted this second option to respond to those needs to again maintain a state of good repair of buses and facilities for Yolo TD. There are, of course, some trade-offs with choosing either of these options. So option A provides that additional funding in the last year of the program, which is also the year with the least amount of funding available. And it also provides a small additional buffer for us to work with if finances worsen in year 3 from current projections. But again, as I noted, it doesn't fund those capital needs for Yolo TD. While option B does fund those needs for Yolo TD and it prioritizes those near-term needs over future uncertainties. But if finances do worsen in year 3, we don't have a lot of wiggle room and it could leave operating deficits partially unaddressed. So just a reminder that staff is seeking a second action today, which is the adoption of accountability measures. So embedded into Senate Bill 125 is a theme of accountability with the long-term financial plan as an example of that. And we really want to build on that theme to incentivize the operators receiving this funding to improve the rider experience, continue to find cost efficiencies, and improve that interagency collaboration that's so important. And so the accountability measures are really focused on making progress in those three key areas. The specific details of each accountability measure are included in attachment A in your packet. But the idea here is for the operators to provide a report on planned, underway, or implemented actions that make progress on each of these. And they were crafted specifically because the operators are really doing a lot of this already, and we kind of want to showcase the progress through this. Each of these also have an intended goal or target, and they're meant to provide clarity on the direction we want to be headed, not necessarily how progress will be evaluated. And so how would this work in practice? So we plan to use an existing quarterly reporting process underway for this program to really reduce administrative burden on the operators. So staff will review and evaluate the quarterly reports through a standardized evaluation form, which is attachment B in your packet. And staff will provide the operators a chance to review our evaluation of their report and adjust their report as needed. And then we plan on providing this committee and the board summary updates on the progress that they're making. So just as an example of that standardized process, staff will evaluate reported progress on each measure through this kind of stoplight framework that's shown on the right here in the table, and with the evaluation obviously tailored to each measure. And all of this is, again, to provide clarity and transparency to the operators on what is being expected. So again, seeking two actions today. First, recommend approval of a funding plan option for year 2 and year 3 of this program, and recommend adoption of accountability measures as part of those regional guidelines. That's it for me. Happy to answer any questions you may have, and I believe staff from each of the operators are also here to answer any questions.
Thank you so very much, Leo. Do the directors have questions before we take public comment for Leo? Go ahead, Director Branscombe.
I remember sometime last year, we were discussing the SAC-RT budget, and it appeared to me then that they are moving quickly towards a financial cliff. And year 3, right now it's year 1, it was 51 million to close the deficit. Year 2, 57, so more than a 10% increase in deficit. And then year 3, what are they going to do? They're going to cut service?
Yeah,
I've got further questions.
oh, sure. Yeah. So this is one-time funding, right? And so part of the comprehensive operational analysis that they're doing is to identify what they'll have to do in the future to address their fiscal cliff.
But again, if you go from year 1 to year 2, it doesn't appear they're doing anything because the deficit grows by 10%. Do they have any data? And what would be interesting would be to see data on cost per passenger mile, which is data that's typical of mass movement. You go to airlines, it's cost per passenger mile. So do they have anything like that? Do they track passenger miles and come up with a cost?
Yeah, I believe they do, and they are here to potentially answer
That would be
question.
data that would be interesting to see. And again, I've looked at their staffing management structure. It's very top heavy with very big salaries at the top. And again, to be running deficits like this, and particularly a deficit increasing by 10% year to year, where's that coming from? Is it coming from actual operations, or is it coming from overhead?
So the vast majority of any transit agency's expenses are from labor, right? Paying wages to the operators.
Yeah, and again, labor is operations labor, and then there's overhead.
That's right. Yeah. So again, but the vast majority is for running service. And so really SAC-RT's workforce, it has a contract, and so some of their wages and benefits increases are contractual, and I'm assuming that's where that growth is coming from.
Well, again, I think having data and historical data on cost per passenger mile would be very interesting, not just for us. I'm talking about for everyone in the community that provides the capital to support these deficits.
So
Thank
if I could, just as a reminder to sort of level set here, as Leo said, and obviously the operators are here to answer questions. We also, you're going to be hearing a lot about transit this year, right? Transit funding, because we actually need healthy, robust transit systems. As Leo said, almost every operator is facing a fiscal cliff in our region. That's going to look bigger for SAC-RT simply because they carry 90% of the region's transit riders. So happy to have them answer any of those particular questions. I think what we're trying to do with these recommendations this morning is make sure that every operator is not facing deficits in the medium term while we figure out a plan. And that's come before you for how do we make sure that we can support our operators so they're financially sound in the long term. Right. So you're giving some medium-term support here to all the operators, including SAC-RT, so they don't have structural deficits in the medium term while we figure out collectively, and that's going to be the subject of future board meetings and workshops and the 16 of you that sit on all the transit agency boards, how do we help all of our transit operators be sustainable in the long run, which is a bigger question.
Thank you.
Can I just add one extra point to, you saw in the beginning, Leo had SACOG's take of the SB 125 funds. That is helping us with a long-term financial sustainability plan that we're required to do under SB 125, which sort of looks at what is going to happen, like how can we ensure sustainability from a financial perspective of our operators once SB 125 is gone. And so we are currently working through the contracting process with a selected consultant for that work and anticipate kicking that off soon. Leo also mentioned that there's a comprehensive operations analysis that's going on. So we are really looking to coordinate those two efforts to make sure that our long-term financial sustainability plan is informing their COA just as much as theirs is informing ours in terms of data. So we'll have a lot of data and we plan to come back with updates on the long-term financial plan that will provide a lot of information, I think, on what's happening and where things are going.
If I may quickly, first of all, I'm going to agree with it, whatever staff recommends, but it'd be nice if you'd recommend A or B versus making us do the work on that. But again, going back, I was recalling the conversation, I think it was last summer, maybe last spring, when we talked about RT. And again, the appearance I had then, and I'm concerned about now, is they are not making plans to deal with the absence of an SB 125 source of funding. And if they have to do it at the last minute, it's going to be, it could be very chaotic and we'll be somehow involved. But anyway, I would like a recommendation as to A or B. You guys are closer to this than I am, and I'm going to say yes to whichever one you recommend.
Thank you so much. Director Early?
I too would love a recommendation A or B. I will tell you my preference and what I'm urging my colleagues to choose, which is option B. For Yolo County, what I can say is that we need to keep our buses running, and we have buses that have over 800,000 miles on them. We call them super seniors. Whereas, right? There's nothing wrong with being a super senior unless you are trying to ride a bus that is not reliable and or safe and trying to get you from point A to point B. Option A leaves, although funds the operation, it actually leaves out critical capital funding. Obviously, option B does both for Yolo County, as well as makes sure that SAC-RT is able to stay whole, which is important in the interim. It also gives, obviously, Yolo County the services that it needs to help us replace the aging buses that, like I said, are barely holding on. In round one, Yolo County did not actually received capital funding. SAC-RT got 36.7 million for capital funding. UBUS Setter got 10 million. And really, even with this, Yolo County is just simply asking for 2.8 million, right? So comparatively, still small. As I said, right now, half of Yolo's bus fleet is actually retirement age. A third of our buses are 16 years old. And again, these buses have served us well, but they are well past their limit. And so it's hard to actually find parts. They break down. And then every day that we run them, we're kind of rolling the dice, right, on reliability. And so for us, this isn't just about machines. It's actually about people. It's about workers. It's about families. It's about students who rely on these buses to get, again, from jobs to home, to make sure their families are able to survive, quite frankly, in Yolo County. And so I would urge you all, and I would recommend, and I'm not staff, but I would recommend that we go with option B.
Thank you very much, Director Early. Director Desmond.
Thank you. Appreciate the discussion. I like that point. I mean, I really think that the biggest factor should be what is best for the respective transit agencies, certainly. But I also want to understand these SB 125 funds. These are allocated to transit agencies and SACOG in the case of the counties that don't have their own RTPA, you're essentially a pass through and you're asking for us about how to administer these funds, correct? This is not meant to supplant the judgment or oversight of the individual governing bodies of these transit agencies. Is that right, Christine?
No,
You
yes.
said that's an accurate statement. Okay. And I think, and it made me think your
Vice Chair
comments.
Desmond, sorry,
Yeah.
can I will say that there is, though, a requirement from the state that we look into the financial sustainability. I mean, that is like with any allocation, right? This is pretty significant, 5.1 billion. So I just want to make sure, yes, you're a pass through. Yes, we're looking at the operator's best judgments. You're the policy making body for this. We rely on the operators, right, and knowing their plans and their financial health, but you do have a role.
Right. In the accountability measures, and that's referenced in that. That's what
And the
that is about.
financial sustainability.
So let me ask you this, Jay. I'm glad you brought that up because how does that work then in Placer and El Dorado County? I mean, who makes that determination whether they're have financial stability? SACOG, does SACOG have a role in that with those counties?
It's with our partners, our two RTPA partners, who
Yeah.
we work very closely with, which is we're doing things very similarly, although their situations are different in that their operating deficits are negligible. And so they absolutely have a role on the financial sustainability, which is why we gave you the information we did.
No, and I understand they have a role, but what is SACOG's role vis-a-vis them in those counties with an RTPA where the money goes to them more directly to administer?
It's a coordination role. I mean, we're looking at everything from a regional perspective. While the funding is state funding and goes to the RTPAs to be administered, there still is a regional coordination need for us to make sure that collectively we're using things the way that we should. I mean, El Dorado County is interesting, right? Because they have El Dorado Transit, which is the only transit operator there, but is a subrecipient to SAC-RT for funding. So there has to be a need for coordination there from the MPO perspective. But, ultimately the needs are the needs in those counties, and they have much fewer operating issues just because there's fewer operators
Right.
and fewer areas to serve. So it's a little different, but coordination.
Well, I appreciate some of this clarification. It's just, I mean, I think SAC-RT, it's a larger transit agency, so it's going to have larger issues. And I don't think it's necessarily unique in the state of California. Larger transit agencies are all facing, I think, a fiscal cliff to one extent or another, which is certainly troubling. I just want to really get some clarification about really how much of an oversight role we have on kind of RT, how our RT's operating, because it felt like the discussion was kind of delving into that a little more than it needed to for purposes of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The chair recognizes Director Chapman.
Thank you, Chair Lauren. So just so I'm clear, the difference between A and B is just that rollover of 2.8 million. So the funding across years 2 and 3 keeps SAC-RT whole across the board, right? And then that in year 4, if it was option A, that 2.8 million would go to what? Where would those dollars end up in year 4 if we went with option A?
So that's to be discussed as year 4 arrives. Right now, we're a little bit too far out to understand what the operating needs are going to be, and that would be fiscal year 2028.
Got it. Yeah, so I mean, I appreciate your comments, Director Early, and I think for sitting from a YOLO Transit perspective, I too obviously prefer option B. And I think part of it as well is when we did the first round last year, right? It was kind of these, it was rushed, right? We all know that. We understood that the goalposts were kind of moving. And for us at YTD, we didn't have a capital improvement plan yet, so we weren't putting in requests for capital dollars. And I think I haven't checked with our executive director that we were kind of thinking that this would then be, would be able to apply for those as the years came, the next funding cycles. As Director Early said, we are obviously in need of capital improvements around our buses and the fleet that we have. And I think part of it for me, why that lands the way it lands, is that it doesn't, in option B, it doesn't move any of those dollars away from the funding needs that SAC-RT has. So for me, option B is preferable. I think it keeps everybody whole across the board and also funds the needs that we have at YTD. Thank you.
Chair Lauren, Director Claricci's online and his hand is up. Would you like him to speak
Yes.
now?
Thank you. Yeah, I agree in the sense that I think we should, obviously we have to pick A or B at some point. B's fine with me. And I actually run a teeny tiny RTPA that we're dealing with the same kinds of issues of this SB 125 funding. I guess the question is, and the answer to this question is going to be like, probably, we don't know. What is going on as a follow-up to 125? Now, I would operate under the assumption that there's not going to be a follow-up. Because if you operate under assumption that there is going to be a follow-up, then you can do things like what you've got laid out here. You can make your year 2 funding whole. You have year 3 funding. You're still kind of okay. And then year 4 funding, you are in a world of hurt. And I would start, and maybe this will be part of all these discussions we're going to have about transit, which is great. I would be like really starting to meter out funds in 3 and 4, not with this action. We need to take care of year 2, essentially. I'd be metering out funds in 3 and 4 right now, or at least having scenarios where you are starting to do some serious adjustments in year 3 and then going to year 4. Or you're going to hit year 4, there's going to be a world of hurt in 3 and 4. But if you go year 2, year 3, as this suggests, I'm looking at option B, obviously, everybody is, and nothing happens, year 4 is going to be a really not nice place to live in. And I think from just a prudent governance standpoint, I'd want to start seeing some options ginned up real soon. They don't have to be perfect, where you start dealing with nothing after year 4. And you have to meter these funds out, or if that's what you want to do. I'm just saying, RT is a large organization. It's not a precision tool. It's going to take a lot of effort. But if you have to hit year 4 and you don't have any extra money sitting around, that TBD there in that box could look pretty awful. Anyway, just my 2 thoughts. I'm okay with option B because it sounds like that will help out folks down there and all of that. And we're having these discussions in El Dorado County as well. We're just fortunate that we don't run a fixed system like the rail system, and we've recovered reasonably well from COVID and all of that. So anyway, my 2 cents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Claricci. Director Early.
Thank you, Chair Lauren. So one, I think this is a necessary discussion, and I know that we continue to have it, and this will be the first of many. So I really do understand that. What I will reflect on in regards to, I think, the root of what we're all touching on is that a fiscal cliff is coming. That's just the reality. And I can share, and I'll keep sharing, at least in Yolo County, what we began to do last year is start to have those conversations, right? As we're looking at the budget, rather than looking at 1-year budgets, looking at multi-year budgets, and really starting to project out if funding goes, then what happens? And so it is on a smaller scale, and I'll acknowledge that. But I think what is unique, and I think one of the things that we should capitalize on that is SACOG is less of the oversight, but more of our ability to actually come together and learn from one another. And that's what I'm hoping will happen over the next year, is that it won't be SAC-RT feeling like even that they have to work in their own bubble. But it will be YTD working with SAC-RT. It will be YTD working with Placer and El Dorado, because the whole region, to your point, because it is the biggest, right, transit operator, will be impacted if we are not able to come together and ensure that SAC-RT is whole for all of our communities, right, the surrounding and singular. And so what I would ask, as we have this transportation committee, is that we really begin to make a plan, right? And I'm more of the, like, it doesn't have to be perfect. Just start moving, please. And I appreciate that we're working on the contracts, we're working on this, and we're working on the plan to then to do, which government does really, really well. But what I would say SACOG also does well is actually the action part as well, and the implementation part. And I think we are going to desperately need that with everything that is happening federally. We are going to have to take care of our own. And I am hopeful, and I would urge my colleagues that we work together and like truly work together to learn from one another, and what you are doing, what we could be doing. As I said, we have workshops that we're doing this year to begin to educate our chair, our entire board, our community on what are the funding streams, what could be going away. And I would hope that we could have SAC-RT come, and that SAC-RT may be doing things differently, but that we hear from you all, so that if there's something that we can plug in or suggest or recommend, not from an oversight perspective, but from my community will be significantly impacted if SAC-RT is not what it needs to be.
Thank you so very much. Mr. Corliss?
Well, I just would say, well said. The next item you're going to have is representation on the SACOG board to meet federal requirements. And the way that we've done this historically, which is the way that we're suggesting doing again, is to have each of you who serve on transit agency boards represent transit as you show up, as you have just been doing. 31 board members sitting around the SACOG table, 16 of you actually sit on transit agency boards. I think what I would go is a step further, Director Early, is to think of yourselves as a caucus, to think of yourselves as a team. And I know in some ways we can sort of think operator by operator, boy, everybody has a very different situation, but in some ways there's a lot of commonalities, you say, and the way out of this, the way through it, is really to have us problem solve this as a region collectively. So I know you have some speaker cards from the operators, but I would say the operators are very aware of these deficits. We have been meeting with them very, very frequently on these things, right? Everybody from SAC-RT to YTD to Yuba Sutter. So they're incredibly aware. We hear you on, we don't want to get to year 4 without a plan. And the good news is you have operational analyses and you have a financial analysis that are going to be prepared as part of this, that are underway, that by the end of the year, early next, we should have a lot more information. And now we have workshops for the SACOG board that we're going to be doing with all of you. So in some ways, stay tuned. The reason in some ways we did not give you, by the way, a recommendation this morning, we know you like to have one, is because A, we didn't have a strong preference expressed by the operators. And B, we actually wanted to have exactly this kind of discussion from you all. So you kind of kick the tires a little bit. It does seem when we do that, you're drilling down a little bit more, as you should.
Thank you very much. Before going to public comment, oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Director Early, your comments. Plan B for year two looks great. Are there any regulations or circumstances that require us to commit to year three or year four numbers now?
So there aren't. The reason we're presenting year three, and this is a preliminary plan, we'll be actually coming back to you all around this time next year for a final kind of year three allocation. The reason why we're presenting year three is because that allows us to request these funds from CalSTA, in which once they hit our accounts, they're able to earn interest, and we can reallocate that earned interest to other projects.
I understand that, but would it be possible? Because if we send a message, oh, year three is taken care of, that sends a message that may not be useful in the circumstances. And I'm reflecting on Director Parici's comments, which I thought were terrific. Do we have to do 2 and 3? Can we just do 2 here?
Yeah, we can just do 2 if that's what the committee.
And we're thinking about 3 and 4. I mean, or are we committing to year 3 if we?
You're committing to a preliminary allocation, right?
It's preliminary. Go ahead, James.
Sorry. That we will come back and revisit, and the benefit of that, I think, is a little bit of planning. Do I hear you say, Director Branson?
Pardon me, I just feel it's irresponsible in these circumstances to make that firm a commitment, any kind of firm commitment to year 3 when you're looking at a cliff.
Well, wait a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think what we're making a commitment to is either option A or option B.
Yes.
And the numbers will change. So I don't think we're committed. We're not committing to a specific amount. We're committing to an option. Is that correct?
You are committing to a specific amount for year 2, but year 3 is preliminary. And again, the reason we're
We'll
doing-
come back and revisit it.
That's right. Next year we'll come back.
Because July 1st is the return to office. You
Right.
know, there'll be a slow ramp up. There will be some additional revenue for the operators in Sacramento and Yolo. I assume because these are robust conversations that that whatever revenue is generated by this little stadium down the street are taken into consideration as well. So, yeah, I think we can speculate about year 3 and 4, but we shouldn't get wrapped around the axle today. I mean, I appreciate the thought behind it, but really we're here to say A or B. I hear a lot of B, and I'm right there with B. So, yeah, and we'll come back and revisit it.
I just would prefer a few question marks next to the numbers on year 3,
Thank
but
you.
I'm fine.
I would like to go to public comment.
Yeah.
We have a card from both Jason Johnson and Autumn Bernstein. Jason Johnson, would you like to go first?
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Jason Johnson, CFO, VP of Finance. Is it not on?
Lean in.
Yeah.
Closer? Okay, sorry.
Be friendly.
VP of Finance, CFO at SAC-RT. First, I want to thank Mr. Corliss and staff for putting together the presentation and report today. As noted, the intent of the SB 125 funds is to maintain current service levels and also provide SAC-RT with time to research new funding opportunities and implement appropriate changes to support a fiscally sustainable future. To that end, SAC-RT does support both options presented. We do also understand that challenges exist, but together I have no doubt that we can overcome them. My intent was to be very brief, but I did want to address a couple of Director Branscom's questions. First of all, the metrics that you're requesting, I do believe we have that. We have tons of metrics that we keep. I'll work with staff at SACOG to get you that information or to get the committee that information. And then also, you're noting the growth in funding from year 2 to year 3 of greater than 10%. Two things, or a couple things. First off, both of those amounts are less than the amount that we requested and received in the current fiscal year. So they're actually decreasing overall in a sense. But that growth from year to year is not just a growth in expenditures, can also be attributed to a decrease in revenues that we've identified from year 2 to 3. And then as was noted previously, our growth in expenditures, some of that is contractually obligated based on union contracts. So being that about 70%, a little over 70% of our entire operating budget is attributed to payroll, typically those increases are anywhere from 5% to 7% year over year. And being that's 70% of our budget. So there's a large portion of that increase that's just built into it if we don't cut service, which isn't the plan at this point. But we are forward looking. We're not just looking at year 2 and 3, we're looking at year 4, 5. We're going all the way out to year 10 at this point and trying to make those plans to become fiscally sustainable. And we're waiting on, we've got the comprehensive operational analysis, as we mentioned, financial plan for the next 5 to 10 years. So we're going through all those processes. We understand the challenges that do exist, and we're working towards a solution for those. So we understand everything you're saying. I hear your concerns. We have those same concerns. That's why I don't sleep well at night right now, because I have those concerns. So we're trying to find those solutions. Absolutely. So
Thank you, Mr.
and we are available if
Dawson.
you have any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Autumn Bernstein.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Autumn Bernstein with YOLO Transportation District. I think Directors Early and Chapman said it pretty well in terms of what's going on with our fleet and the challenges that we have. I can just tell you that's what keeps me awake at night. We, at any given time, have about 15 to 20% of our fleet out of service, which is much higher than we want it to be because we literally have to rebuild or machine parts. The manufacturers they don't provide parts for buses as old as some of the buses that we're running. Every time I see one of those on the causeway, I just think about what happens if it breaks down with people on it at rush hour. And that jeopardizes the safety of our passengers. So the need is real, and I appreciate the support being heard, being expressed for option B. I will just point out as well that we did not apply for capital dollars in the first round because we did not have proper documentation for those. We did not have a capital improvement plan that was less than 15 years old at the time. We wanted to make sure we had the best modern information about what our capital needs before going and asking you for this funding. And to us, we always expected we would have a second bite at the apple to make that capital funding request. So it feels like the goalposts have shifted. We actually asked for close to $15 million. Even in option B, we're only getting at most about 5. So 2/3 of what we're asking for is not even on the table here. So I do ask for your support for option B. In terms of the longer term funding conversation, I agree that it's critical. And I would just say coming up May 27th, we're having a special workshop with Ray Tellis, who's our FTA Region 9 administrator, who's going to be talking about federal transit funding and what's going on with that. And we'll have Chad Edison from the California State Transportation Agency talking about state transportation. We'll also have Professor Kerry Watkins from UC Davis talking about the Transit Transformation Task Force, which is also trying to tackle this issue at a statewide level of what do we do to deal with this fiscal cliff. So that's going to be May 27th. It'll be in person in Woodland, but also on Zoom, and everyone is welcome to attend, and details on that will be available on our website. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Motion to approve option B.
Before you make the motion to approve, and I really respect that you're making that motion, I just want to say that SACOG asks us to think regionally so we can create more vibrant and connected communities that improve the quality of life for everyone. And I think we're doing that today with your motion. I'm looking for
Chair
a
Lauren,
second.
sorry, I
yes.
did want to point out that Director Clarici has
Oh.
his hand raised.
Oh, Director
I
Clarici.
don't want to interfere with this conversation too much, but I do want to speak. I wanted to speak to the issue of years 3 and 4 and how we classify them. The one thing about SB 125, and I wish, and James and his staff can correct me or whatever, but everything that the state of California funds should be funded like 125. It has probably the most flexible reporting and updating and planning things. I don't know how it is for an MPO, but I know for an RTPA, it has been really refreshingly easy to deal with. The great thing about it is that you could pass option B with the numbers that are here for 3 and 4 and come back and change them. 3 and 4 are not etched in granite. It's a really nice program in that regard. And I'm just saying that because I think some of the concerns are justified, but in terms of my understanding of 125 and the way we're dealing with it with my client, it's real easy to fix these numbers. You can go back in and change them pretty simply. So anyway, that's it. I just want to point that out. Thank you very much.
Early second.
Thank you, Director. We have a motion to select item B from Director Branscombe with a second from Dr. Early. Please call the roll in favor.
And it's not only the motion for option B, but the second part of the request from staff. Is that what I hear?
I understand it's, your three is not casting.
No, I'm sorry. There are two requests from staff.
Yep.
Yes.
It's either option A or option B, and also adoption of or recommend approval or adoption of the accountability measures.
The accountability measures. Is that in your motion?
Yes.
And I second the adoption of the accountability measures in addition to recommending option B move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll call the roll, and I will just thank Director Hudashelt for keeping me straight.
Yeah.
All right,
It's a team game.
it's team.
Director Baumgarten,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Chapman, Clarici,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Jennings absent, Jones absent, Sander, Vice Chair Desmond,
Aye.
Vice Chair Howdashelt,
Aye.
and Chair Lauren.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries unanimous.
Colleagues, I just want to make one comment.
Okay.
You know, as a past chair of RT over a decade ago, I feel this industry is constantly living at the edge of a cliff. So when you hear that, it's just sort of normal. I remember becoming chair and having my executive director tell me, oh, by the way, Chair Sander, we need to find $120 million to buy buses and rail cars because all of ours are expiring. As if we hadn't known that for 20 years, that was coming, right? It's a constant cliff business. So this is maybe a little unusual, but really not so in the big context. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We will be moving on to item 4, transit representation on metropolitan planning, organizations and governance update by Christina Sven. There it is.
Good morning. Yes, and we talked a little bit about this item already, so we won't have to spend too much time. But as noted before, as an MPO, federal regulations do stipulate that the board has to have representation by public transit providers. The board first adopted a resolution on this item in 2016 and has continued to adopt this year over year. What it does is it identifies that any board member that also sits on a transit board will represent transit interests at the SACOG board. So currently, as James has noted, there's quite a number of board members that serve on transit boards as well. So representing about 9 transit agencies across the 6-county region. So to comply with this federal guidance related to that representation on the board, staff is asking that the committee continue with this practice and to recommend that the board adopt the resolution that was included in your packet to continue this representation. Not specific to the action, there's kind of a second part to the staff report, but very much a related topic. We also have an MOU. SACOG is a party to an MOU along with every transit operator in the region to help kind of define roles and responsibilities for agency coordination and how federal transit funding is allocated throughout the region. The last MOU was signed in 2015. There's been a lot of changes since then, you know, consolidations, annexations, all sorts of things that we need to address to really update it and make sure that this is relevant and that we have clear understanding across our region how we're all going to work together and move forward transit funding. So we have started working with the transit operators on updating this MOU. SAC-RT is the designated recipient for what's known as the Sacramento UZA. So we've been working with them on some of those MPO designated recipient relationship items. But we do have our first meeting with all transit operators planned for next week to start talking about the details and moving this forward. As the MPO, we're sort of the facilitator and convener in this process. So we're hoping to get something formalized and finalized on the MOU and to you for adoption by the end of summer or early fall so that we can move forward with this. But there's no action on that piece, but we did want to just give you an update since it is somewhat related to board representation and how we work as an MPO with our transit operators. So with that, we're happy to take any questions, but do recommend that you recommend approval to the board.
Thank you so very much.
If there are no questions or no public comment, I'll move the item. Second.
Is there any public comment on the item?
There's no public comment.
Okay, the motion has been moved by Hochschild, seconded by Desmond. Roll call vote, please.
Director Boomgarden,
Aye.
Branscombe,
Aye.
Chapman, Clarici,
Aye.
Early,
Aye.
Jennings and Jones absent, Sander, Vice Chair Desmond,
Aye.
Vice Chair Howdeshell,
Aye.
and Chair Lauren.
Aye.
Motion
Thank you.
carries.
Chair Lauren, can I just reemphasize that we're going to have a workshop at the board meeting, the full board meeting coming up April 17th on sort of a Transit 101 with a very special guest speaker to the theme that you've just covered in both of the last items. In May, your board meeting is a little late because of cap to cap, so May 29th. We're going to have a great speaker on microtransit, sort of the on-demand microtransit, Susan Shaheen from UC Berkeley. And right after that board meeting, we want to see if we can get enough of you, the 16 of you that serve on those transit agency boards, to have a lunch afterwards. And TBD, we're going to invite the operators. And this, I think, hopefully is again, the evolution of you all being a caucus. That can be open to other board members or if you're serving as alternates, but just in terms of next steps for the 16 of you, that is that nascent, emerging, powerful caucus. Thanks.
Thank you. Moving on to item 5, the information section of our agenda. I would like to introduce from Plan to Action implementing the 2025 blueprint. And today, this is brought by, wrote it down, Justine Racio Patel.
Actually, that'll be the mobility
Oh,
zones
I got the
item,
wrong
which
one.
is a
Sorry about
good
that.
heads up for Justine that she's next.
Oh, Clint, I cut you out.
No worries.
This is the blueprint with Clint Holtzen. Thank you, and thank you for coming to Winners on Tuesday night.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I will be brief in my presentation so we can jump right into the direction and input that you all have. So I'm gonna give you a little bit of background on where we've been with the plan. Now we are working towards developing policies that will kind of support the implementation of all the strategies that are part of this plan. And these are discussion questions. These are also in your packet, just to keep in mind as we're going through this and you're giving input. Briefly, what do the plan policies do? So as a reminder, end of last year, this board adopted both a land use package and a transportation package to kind of make up all of the future assumptions, forecasts for the plan. Now we've got to kind of back up all of those assumptions with policies that are going to help us implement this. So these are not just policies for SACOG. SACOG has an absolute important role in implementing these, but these are things that kind of help the region identify consistent supportive actions. Because the plan is based in your local plans, your general plans, your specific plans, your policies, it is intended to be very supportive of things that are already happening at the local level. And then where we are falling behind as a region or local agencies need support, that's where SACOG programs can really come in and support. It's also important to note that this plan, it's not a regulatory document, so this does not supersede any city or county general plan or other planning policies. One of the first actions that the board took with the plan update is to adopt kind of an overarching policy framework for the plan. And as a quick reminder, that was this triple bottom line of advancing these co-equal goals for an equitable, economically prosperous, and then environmentally healthy region. We got an extension to do an additional, have an additional couple of years to update this plan. That allowed us to do a lot more outreach. We were able to touch about 6,000 residents throughout the region. And these are the themes that we heard through all of that outreach. And I'll just highlight a couple of them. Number one concern for residents throughout the region that we found in our surveys was on housing affordability and providing housing options for people throughout their life cycle, whether that is just starting out in a apartment or your starter home, maybe moving to the suburbs into something larger as you're raising kids, but then also as you're retiring, do you have options out there if you do want to downsize or relocate? And then natural disaster preparedness, protecting people and property was another important theme that emerged through our outreach. And then safety was a big concern for residents, not just safety driving your car or walking or biking, but also do you feel safe waiting at a transit stop, riding transit? So it's kind of an overarching theme of safety and the perception of safety. What the plan is, what we're planning for with this plan is about a 25% growth in the region in population to about 3.1 million people by 2050. To accommodate that, around 280,000 new homes, 263,000 new jobs. So each plan, this is a living document. We update this plan every 4 years. And so we kind of build on the policy commitments from the last plan. The last plan identified these 4 strategic priority areas. These also became the 4 priority areas in SACOG's strategic plan that the board adopted in 2022. And I'll just give a couple of brief examples about how the policies end up supporting these priority areas. So building vibrant and inclusive places. I won't go through these in detail right now, but creating opportunities for people to live and work in healthy, thriving communities. Diversity of housing options is an important strategy in the plan. So one of the draft policies that you have in your packet, we have Green Means Go. One of the strategies of this plan is to invest in and grow within the existing footprint of the region. About 2/3 of the growth is happening in those established communities and those center and corridor communities. That's consistent with where we've seen growth in the past in the region. If we look back at kind of the last 5 and 10-year trends, but we do know that in the center and corridor communities, these are our main streets, kind of aging commercial corridors, places where we have, and local governments have a lot of plans for mixed use infill, for where you've got housing, and sometimes it's vertical, sometimes it's horizontal mixed use. But those are the areas that we know we're lagging. And Green Means Go is the program that we have to try to overcome those barriers, both through regulatory change, but really importantly through infrastructure investments in the things that are kind of holding up residential development, particularly housing development in these corridors, where the first developer in is having to foot the bill for new infrastructure. This is a way to get patient capital where the public sector can come in, invest in those things, and clear an area. So that's just one example of how these policies translate into programs and support the strategies of the plan. I mentioned housing diversity is an important part of this plan. That was a big concern for residents. And so SACOG also helps identify regulatory reforms that could happen at the local government that can make the environment more compatible to a variety of housing types. And we recognize that the same solutions are not going to work throughout the region. And so we can, because we're a regional agency, we can help convene smaller jurisdictions, rural jurisdictions, urban jurisdictions, and share lessons and best practices that might work and be applicable in different communities throughout the region. So priority 2, we've got to be very creative and innovative in the way that we invest in transportation in the region. We don't have enough money to pay for everything we want. And so looking to the future, what kind of mobility solutions are out there, being very innovative to make the most efficient use of our transportation systems is kind of the strategy of the plan. So encouraging, in our 2020 plan, we had a policy, and you'll see kind of how policies have transformed from the 2020 plan to the draft policies for the blueprint in your packet. But we were looking to implement pilots of micromobility like bike share and scooter share across the region. Some of the input we got from Land Use Committee last month was those as you're doing that, you've got to be very, very context sensitive in how you're looking at different micromobility solutions that would work throughout the region. What works in downtown Sacramento is not necessarily going to work in Winters. And so where you may have bike and scooter share in Sacramento, when you're out in Winters, you've got the B line. It's a different type of solution. But those solutions really need to be context sensitive to different community needs across the region. Modernizing the way we pay for transportation, this is a really big one. We know that with the transition to more zero emission vehicles, electric vehicles, fuel efficient vehicles, we're seeing declines in fuel funding that comes to transportation through the fuel tax. And so we are looking in this plan, in the 2020 plan, for the first time, we introduced tolling as a way to help finance investments into our system. We're also taking part in the pilot of the California road charge that the state is moving to shift away from the fuel tax. Since the last plan, we called in the 2020 plan, called for the establishment of a toll authority. That happened. We now have CARTA. And so that policy is kind of transforming now into an ongoing partnership with CARTA to actually implement the regional toll lane network that we've identified with Caltrans and with YTD and with others around the region as kind of as part of the update to this plan. So now we have something more tangible that we can start partnering and moving forward on. Building, maintaining safe and equitable and resilient transportation system. I talked about safety and resilience being really important when we heard from residents around the region. Jump. So a couple of ways that looks, how that translates into action in the plan. The board just adopted a new funding framework for our state funds, and you'll be having a federal fund conversation about federal funds for next year. And kind of going through 2 years of work with a working group around the funding program, the state funding program, we landed on a program that emphasizes state of good repair and maintenance and investing in the existing system. And that is very much in line with what the blueprint is trying to do. And so, as I mentioned, this is a living document. So you're implementing the plans as you're developing the plans. And so this policy to prioritize our existing flexible funding sources into state of good repair is something that the board has already been working towards with the revamping of our state program. And then supporting bicycle and pedestrian investments. We've got the regional trails program to connect communities throughout the region with 1,100 miles, more than 1,000 miles of trail. And so SACOG can lean in and support local agencies in applying for state and federal grants. We have our own programs to help implement those trail projects as well. Really quickly on just next steps, we're looking today for input from you on the policies in the plan, any direction, questions or thoughts that you have. We will turn all of that around into a draft plan that we expect to bring to the land use committee next month and the board to release for 2 months of public review. And then we'd be coming back in September, October with responses to comments for all of that, a revised draft plan that we would then ask you to adopt by November so that we can have a plan in place before this year ends. And then these are those discussion questions again, just as a reminder. So I will stop there and just see if there are any comments, input on the policies or questions about what we're trying to do.
Thank you so very much. Do we have comments, questions, discussion from our members? Yes. Chair.
I'll start with just a few comments. Thank you, Clint, for the presentation. I mean, I'm really happy that you, I think, have hit on all the right points. We've had this discussion for a long time. I agree with a lot of the points I think the Lunar Committee brought up in terms of not having a one size fits all, certainly when it comes to transit and how we move people around. I'm looking forward to that micro mobility discussion. I mean, I think for so long we've had a hub and spoke model with transit forever, and in recognition of just kind of a new way people move around and not going to one centripetal place in their community anymore. How do we adapt to that? And that's a real challenge in these far-flung communities. But I think you're on the right. I can't think of anything, no glaring omission. In my opinion, I think you're paying appropriate attention. We are paying appropriate attention to these older commercial corridors that have a ton of opportunities, but also happen to be the most expensive places to build as well, right? Where we desperately need more development. And Green Means Go, great program that you highlighted, which we need a heck of a lot more of. So those are my comments.
Those are great comments. Director Hudachel.
Yeah, Clint, I want to make sure I understand the 30, the environment. And I think of that as air quality. Am I thinking that in the right context?
Yeah, I think air quality plus the region is about 3/4 kind of open space, working lands. And so we've got our natural resources economy. We've got a lot of open space. We've got forest and then air quality. I think it's kind of it's an all encompassing goal.
And then in the air quality lens, I think of the indirect source, the automobile, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we took an action last night in Roseville to begin a process where we're going to retool an energy plant. It didn't have any air quality. When it got built in 1985, there was no air quality equipment on it. It will now have that. So I don't know how that factors into investment in existing communities, but I do want to point that out because I think that then you're creating a cleaner source of energy. There's no absolutely. I've watched enough clips of Landman to know there's no clean energy. Even those big old wind turbines. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that we're beginning that investment that'll really come online in a few years. And it's a significant investment.
Thank you.
Chair Lauren, I appreciate the comments here. I think we would just sort of close by saying, we are trying to figure out with this plan, obviously, as always, and Vice Chair Desmond, you mentioned Green Means Go, right? That's a great example of last plan in 2020. We said, my God, we need a lot more infill. It's not happening quick enough. And so it's an example of how we really moved to implement the plan, right? In partnership with your local jurisdictions. We don't want this plan to be seen as a SACOG plan, right? That's SACOG's plan. They'll figure it out. This is us, back to your team analogy earlier, Director Early, right? So these are written initially, these policies and the actions, a little bit with sort of verbs about SACOG will encourage, SACOG will incentivize. But really what we're hoping to do in the next few months as we release this draft is work with all of your jurisdictions and our partner agencies so that people see themselves in the plan and say, you know what, that's really our role and we're going to commit to X, Y, and Z, right? So this is a jointly held, jointly owned regional plan, right, that we all have a piece of.
Thank you. I don't have any public comment cards. Does Clarici have a comment online? Otherwise, the chair recommends, calls on Mr. Sanders.
I'm just gonna second Director Desmond's comments with regard to infill. That is still a huge regional challenge. I think when we do the tour of Arden Arcade, we'll probably sort of see the modern day challenges around infill. Those are certainly reflected in my community and essentially every community represented here at SACOG, that it's incredibly difficult to do infill. There are just so many economic barriers. And I'd say the other thing where we've got, and this is probably our interest, not so much in the last MTP, but the one before that, was a real focus on fix it first. And the idea that we've got a lot of stuff out there that is decaying at an accelerated rate in terms of infrastructure. And because of that, it's going to cost us more to repair as opposed to being able to keep things in a state of good repair. So we were just talking about transit having a cliff. All of us not in the transit business, we've got a cliff too. It's all that aging infrastructure out there that we have no capacity to actually care for or repair long-term, or certainly not keep it in the most efficient mode. I mean, even in my city, I think we have one of the higher pavement, quality indexes in the region. And we have the ability to throw more money at it. It is an incredibly big lift to get to that optimal point. Very challenging for us. And I know it's impossible for some people sitting at this table. So I think the plan really needs to take into account the need to maintain what we already have.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make one other additional comment. I happened to be in Chair Lawrence's community yesterday in Winters, and there's we think about trails and we think about them as maybe leisurely, a leisure activity. Certainly there's a percentage of that. A lot of folks come over from Davis to your community in Winters and beyond. But increasingly those trails are being used in Roseville, they're used to get to schools. And increasingly, and this becomes a bit of a double-edged sword, is the e-mobility that are on those trails. And we saw this when we were in Denver, when we heard about that, how much further people went on, their scooters or their bikes. So I think it bears breaking down the perception that trails are just for, that leisurely walk, they are going to be increasingly connecting communities and infill communities. So thank you.
Thank you. I just want to end with saying that we all know that one size doesn't fit all, and sometimes government's good at one size fit all solutions, but we are good at looking at our own communities and making sure that we're all heard. Any other comments? Thank you. I would like to move to the information item, mobility zones, phase 1 zones, and this item is going to be brought to us by Justine Recio Patel, and it is her first time at SACOG, so welcome.
Not just her first time before me, huh?
No.
Okay.
Chair, and good morning, directors. My name is Justine Rasha Patel. I'm an analyst on the transportation team. And if you can't tell by all the pink, I'll be presenting today on the mobility zones. Oh, is this a clicker? Yes. We'll start today with sure. We'll start today with a recap of last month's lunch presentation. I have Emily Alter here with me today. She's our consultant from STEER, and she'll go over the technical analysis that's gone into identifying the mobility zones in our region. You've probably seen most of these slides before, previous presentations by Kathleen and our Mobility Zones Roadshow at some of your board meetings, so this will be a light touch. Then I'll walk you through the how we prioritize the zones and talk about the committee engagement process and how we kept community at the center of our approach. And then finally, we'll take a brief look at what's coming next for the project. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Emily.
Thanks so much, Justine. Good morning, members of the committee. As Justine mentioned, my name is Emily Alter, and I'm the Mobility Zones Project Manager for STEER Consulting, who leads the consulting team. I'm going to just give a very quick overview and recap of the analysis that we've done so far on the project. As Justine mentioned, this is stuff that you've heard before, so I'm going to just quickly remind you of the analysis that we've done. So at a high level, mobility zones are those areas that have both equity need and transportation need. In defining equity need for the SACOG region, we wanted to be sure to adopt a bottoms-up, community-led approach that really identified equity need based on priority from local community members. And so in order to do that, what we did is took a list of equity criteria to community members and had them rank them on the impact that these criteria had on their quality of life and equity concerns. What you see here in the bar charts are the results of that ranking, where you can definitely identify that across the different counties, there are different kind of equity priorities from community members. So in El Dorado County, for example, you're seeing a high focus on being an older adult or living with a disability and recognizing that that is having an impact on quality of life for community members. Versus in Sacramento County, where we see that exposure to something like pollution burden is impacting the quality of life. Collectively across all 6 counties, we saw an emphasis on the housing and transportation costs that folks are facing and how that's impacting their quality of life. And so when we ran this analysis and engagement, we then took these rankings of the individual criteria on a county level and sort of adjusted the weight that we gave to those criteria in each of your counties. The results of that assessment were a mapping of areas with equity needs across the 6 counties. Places like Fruit Ridge Pocket and Lemon Hill, which we know are racially diverse low-income communities. Linda and Olivehurst, where we are seeing low-income community members experiencing high pollution exposure, or Pony Express and Pollock Pines, where older adults have a high housing and transportation cost. So once we'd done an analysis on the areas with equity needs, we then began to identify those communities that had high transportation needs and opportunities. In order to do this, we again selected criteria that looked at where there was transportation access and quality of life, both opportunities and barriers that warranted additional exploration through the Mobility Zones project. So places that had limited access to public transit, or where there was a high concentration of community resources, where there might be crash hotspots or gaps in the sidewalk and pedestrian infrastructure. Once we'd mapped these areas with transportation needs, we then layered them on top of the areas with equity needs to begin to identify where there might be good candidate mobility zones from across the 6 counties. We looked to establish a preliminary list of mobility zones that spread across the 6 counties and represented a diversity of community types. In order to do this, we layered the quantitative analysis with a qualitative review of previous committee engagement that we'd done, conversations that we had with local partners and jurisdictions and the transit agencies, and internal workshops with SACOG staff to identify those areas where not only we were seeing equity and transportation needs, but we also knew there was a good likelihood of our ability to advance a mobility zone project. And the results of that qualitative assessment are the 23 mobility zones that you see here, which again are spread across the 6 counties and represent a diversity of your communities. I'm now going to hand it back to Justine, who's going to talk through how we went from these 23 to our 10 phase 1 mobility zones.
Thank you, Emily. So after qualitative and quantitative analysis, our team now had a good idea where we saw that high equity need and high transportation need intersecting across our region. However, at this time, the Mobility Zones project is only scoped to analyze, study, and advance projects in 10 zones. So given that project limitation, the team took on the task of figuring out which of these communities can we prioritize right now. So for this, we leveraged the expertise of our project committees. You may remember this graphic from previous presentations. It outlines our overall structure, and you can see here that our project is organized into several committees. These committees shape the prioritization process and the project decisions overall, and they each have a representative on the project task force there in pink, which is the main decision-making body of this project. We wanted to make sure that we centered community voices and on-the-ground perspectives in selecting these phase 1 zones. And so we began this work with our community committees. The community committees are composed of representatives from community-based organizations, local leaders, and residents from each county. And at a high level, we had the members review, discuss, and vote on which of the 23 zones that they'd like to go forward in this phase of the project. And to aid our committee members in reviewing the zones, our project team put together these zone profiles, which you can find in attachment C for each of the 23 mobility zones. They're meant to distill key information, but still give enough detail to make sure that the committee members could make informed decisions when it came time to discuss and vote. So here's an example of the candidate zone in Florin, and we asked members to consider things like population, land use conditions, and transportation challenges in each zone. So after reviewing each zone, we asked the committee members to rank their preferred zones within their county, and this helped the project team identify the top 2 to 3 choices that would move forward as recommendations to the task force. We used Mentimeter to collect these votes, tally them, and visualize them in real time. We really wanted to be sure that the selected zones were reflective of the committee's shared priorities and values. And so we used this consensus building tool called Fist to 5 voting, recommended by our partners Civic Thread, where that would open up the discussion a little bit. We gave committee members a chance to discuss if they felt, we gave them a chance to discuss if they felt any hesitation or resistance to the selections, and then work through some of those burning questions together. And once everyone had a chance to speak, we repeated the ranked choice vote and the Fist to 5 process until we were sure about the selected zones. And so as we were having these conversations, we saw that these community committees sat with the same hard questions that the board sits with. These questions were, do we select communities with existing infrastructure, or do we focus on places that haven't seen as much investment? Where can we have the greatest impact, and how do we find that greatest impact? What key corridors matter most to the community, and how do we balance our local needs with the county-wide and agency priorities? And so after a lot of discussion, a lot of voting, and a lot of rounds of that Fist to 5 process, our community committees were able to narrow down the 23 mobility zones and select 12 phase 1 candidates to move forward to task force. And if step 1 was getting the input of the community committees, Step 2 for our project team was understanding the selection of our municipal and technical committee. So we had staff from cities and counties and regional agencies and transit operators provide input as well. We provided them with the 23 zone profiles and gave them the list of the 12 candidate zones. And we asked them to review whether these aligned with ongoing municipal and agency efforts. And so the initial list of 12 contained a strong representation of urban and rural areas, where we typically see a lot of gaps in transit and a high dependency on cars. And the municipal and technical committee really wanted to see a more balanced variety of place types represented in the zones, particularly more suburban areas, as these places also have high rates of car dependency and transit gaps. And so in addition to those phase 1 candidates, those 12 that were selected by the community committee, the technical and municipal committee put forward 4 additional zones, bringing us to 16 phase 1 candidates that went to task force for approval. And so we had the task force go through the 23 zones. Sorry. We walked through a similar process with the task force as we did with the community committees. The project task force reviewed the 16 phase 1 zones and ranked their choices and engaged in discussion through the FISTIFY process, and then they voted on the selection as well. And so we went from 23, those 23 zones, they reviewed the 16 zones, and they selected 10 phase 1 mobility zones to move forward with for the remainder of our pilot. And so these are the 10 phase 1 zones that were selected by the project task force. It took a lot of collaboration to get us here, but we're very proud of the work and of the results. I want to be clear that all 23 zones that were considered for this project met the project criteria for mobility zones. These are places where we see high equity need and high transportation need. But ultimately, these 10 zones were selected based on the community input and a desire for a balanced regional spread of place types. So the project is going to focus on these 10 for the remainder of our pilot, and we hope to revisit the remaining 13 in future phases of the program. And like I mentioned, we are a pilot, so we've learned a lot through this process, and we're continuing to iterate as we go along. I want to share with you some feedback that we received from our committee members about the process so far. The full versions of the comments are in attachment F. Our community members talked a lot about the longstanding inequities in transportation investment in our region and how that can impact people living in rural communities. And so we really wanted to make sure that we had represented rural communities in our phase 1 mobility zones. We also heard a desire for more real talk in transportation instead of industry lingo or catchphrases that the public don't typically understand. And we are very intentional about creating a collaborative and inclusive environment throughout the process. Our goal is to continue to put the community at the center of this project and keep having these important conversations. I want to talk a little bit about the phase 1 mobility zones. So after the task force had selected and voted on these phase 1 mobility zones, our project team went back and checked to see how well these aligned with state and federal and even our regional priorities across the SACOG region. And we noticed that there was some significant overlap with some SACOG green zones, which Clint talked about earlier. You may recognize Woodland and Florin from last year's REAP offsite board tours. I also want to thank Vice Chair Desmond for working with our staff to plan the upcoming tour in the Ben Ali Swanson area in June. We really appreciate the support and coordination that it's been taking to put this together. I also want to flag for a committee that a majority of these zones align with the new federal administration's priorities to support growing families and future workforce in areas with high birth rates or high marriage rates. I also want to emphasize that all 10 zones have been recognized or designated in some way by state and federal priority programs. So what's next for the project? We're working on refining zone boundaries. The squares and boxes that you see on the map are really just a starting place, but we want to make sure that actual boundaries reflect realistic conditions. And so a lot of that work is going to rely on the outreach that our project team conducted in February and March. In February, our team from Civic Thread started an outreach campaign to understand the needs and opportunities of these zones and get a sense of where the community wanted to put these zone boundaries. We also partnered with several community-based organizations across the region who hosted pop-ups and facilitated in-person workshops within and around the zones. And altogether, 510 people engaged in person with the mobility zones and contributed 921 comments across all 10 zones. We also spoke with our community committees and members of our technical and municipal committees in March about where we should be putting these boundaries. And so we're taking all that feedback and coming back to you in May with a final list of the mobility zones and the phase 1 priorities with the boundaries. So next month, we'll be back with some information on that engagement as well as zone boundaries that we drew. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you, directors, for your time and your patience. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, but otherwise, happy to hand it over back to you, Chair Lauren.
Happy to ask for questions. Do we have questions on mobility zones? Yes, the Chair
Thank you,
recognizes
Chair.
Boog Button.
So what's next for those of us who have been anointed a mobility zone? What do we need to do?
That's a good question. Right now, our project team is working on understanding where those zones like end and begin. And so we are talking to local jurisdictions, the staff at these local jurisdictions to understand needs and opportunities as well. And so we're conducting a lot of the analysis through summer, and we'll be back in September to give you a little bit more about what we, to report back on what we found. And then we'll be working on prioritizing and ideating some projects for advancement in 2026.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you, Justine. Thank you. And good job on the presentation here. Your first time in front of Vice Chair Howdeshell. You did a great job.
I'm shaking like a leaf.
You mentioned that they align with some of the state and federal designations that like are these all environmental justice communities as defined by the
Some
state
of them
guidelines?
are, and some of them are also, I believe, opportunity zones, which are a federal designation. And so we kind of just cross-checked with these maps that are available online to see kind of like where these zones fell. So.
Okay, great. And just because we identified this initial tranche, I mean, all of the mobility zones will benefit from the work we're doing with these initial 10, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation. That's a lot of information to cover. I have so many questions, but I'll do them between now and the May meeting. Some of these final 10 make absolute sense. Some of them, I'm just going to drill down on one in North Auburn and ask if I heard correctly. These were identified as the community's interest.
Yes.
Did they get, looking for the right word, were they validated, not validated? Were they like we have mobility that can serve some of these communities? Was that held up against their preferences? Did they know that information?
Yes, absolutely. So we tried to be as thorough as we could with in our zone profile. So we provided them this information about what's existing in the area, if there are any transit assets. I think that's what you're talking about.
We have some micro mobility, right? So
yes.
ride sharing
I
pay
actually
for.
don't know if we were able to include that in our zone profiles. I think Emily would have a better idea.
Yeah, so for things like that, they may not have ended up in the zone profiles, but what happened after the community committees did their selection was we did present all of the 12 candidate zones to the municipal and technical committees who are comprised of the local jurisdictions and transit agencies. So they brought in that information about kind of existing services that existed within zones that had been selected or hadn't been selected that may impact whether or not it was a good zone. And I do remember in Northern Auburn, there was a discussion around the kind of micro transit services that were available and the availability of the jurisdiction to really support an additional investment and coordinate on that.
I'll reserve the rest of my questions for between now and May. Is that okay, Mr. Corliss?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
I mean-
Take another hour.
Please reserve.
Please reserve.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the item? I just want to really thank you for your presentation. And I'm looking at the clock. Thank you also. I'm looking at the clock and we have 3 items, but May is Bike Month is the most timely item. So I'd like to ask Mr. Corliss if it's okay if we take May is Bike Month and move the others to the next agenda.
Get on my cycle.
Yes, that's good.
All right. May is Bike Month 2025 update. Welcome Nicole Z. Ling Porter. We get socks.
Every time I come here, all you say is, where are the socks? How about happy birthday? Today's my birthday. And there's socks.
These are the largest.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, good morning, almost good midday, everybody. For those of you that don't remember me, I'm Nicole Zeeling Porter. I'm on the transportation team here at SACOG. And today, to wrap up our committee meeting, we're joined by the Sacramento area bicycle advocates to give you an update on this year's May is Bike Month campaign. All right, so May is Bike Month was first launched in 2004, and it is our region's most recognizable sustainable mode campaign. And we regularly attract thousands of participants each year. It's an annual month-long campaign that's really devoted to promoting biking as an alternative mode of transportation. We've had folks log millions of rides, hundreds of thousands of trips by registering online, logging their commute, errand, recreation miles, earning badges, and attending events all throughout May. Our campaign really has 3 main goals. We're looking to reduce traffic congestion, improve our region's air quality, and decrease our total greenhouse gas emissions. And for the past 15 years, SACOG had really planned and coordinated this campaign. But in 2022, we transitioned full management of May is Bike Month over to what I would say is our region's strongest bike advocacy groups, Sacramento Area Bike Advocates, who you probably know as SABA. To really help shift our staff's resources on the sustainable mobility team to other priorities. And so I'm really going to hand it over to them since they've been leading the program for the past few years to recap last year's numbers and share about this May's campaign.
Hi, I'm Deb Banks. I'm the executive director of SABA, and I brought Rob Youngren here today, who manages all of our May is Bike Month work. I'm going to have Rob chat. I'm just handing it off to him.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm the project manager for May is Bike Month. Started in the 2023 campaign, so this is my 3rd year managing the program. 2024, we had about almost 4,500 riders register on Love to Ride and track their rides throughout the month of May. That's 327 workplaces that participated. We got 826 new riders to start riding a bike during May. Gender split on that was about 45% female, which is the best stats Love to Ride has seen in their international campaign of trying to get more people on bikes. Riders rode over 570,000 miles and offset 61,000 pounds of CO2 during May. It's a vital campaign to get more people on bikes and replacing car trips with bike trips. So we use Love to Ride as the platform to track rides and also do prize distribution for prize drawings at the end of the month. They have a gamification model, making it a fun interaction to ride your bike more, earning badges as you complete longer miles and more trips throughout the month. We have a team of partners, about 100 people on our partner list with various organizations around the 6-county region, planning events in their neck of the woods to help support the campaign. And then SABA does a lot of fundraising to raise anywhere from $40,000 to $60,000 to support our swag campaign, get prizes, put socks on feet.
Butts on bikes.
Yeah, and butts on bikes. And then we have a calendar of events that we plan to engage riders throughout the region during May and in the lead up to May to get people registered for the campaign, give them fun stuff to do around the Sacramento region. We also have a community event calendar where anybody can add their cycling focused event to it. Last year we did over 100 events that Saba staff were personally at between April and May. It's a busy time. So on May 3rd this year is our kickoff event, which will be on Riverfront Street in West Sacramento. It's a great time. We get a large crowd out there. We're growing it from last year. Do a road closure along Riverfront Street. We'll have pump tracks, lots of civic engagement, DJs, free bike parking, all sorts of fun stuff. Bike and Seek will be a fun event on the 10th for people to go out and find little tokens that we hide around the community, and then we'll meet up at a central point at the end of that day to have a party. Bike to Work Day, we do Energizer stations around the region. We'll be at Guy West Bridge giving away May's Bike Month swag to encourage people to ride during Ride to Work Day. We have an event going with River Cats on the 18th. We'll be doing bike valet at a River Cats game to help encourage people to not drive to the ballpark.
And bike repair.
And doing bike repair. Yes.
Yeah,
Exactly.
We valet your bike and keep it safe and secure.
Yeah. Yeah, Bike Valet is one of Saba's most public-facing programs. Any event that's at Golden One, we check park bikes for free. Aftershock, we're one of the main mediation strategies that they have for the parking nightmare that is. People can ride in, park their bike for free right at the front gate, go enjoy the show. We keep their bikes safe and secure. Rite of Silence on the 21st kind of memorializes the lives we've lost in our region to vehicular violence. We'll be doing cargo bike races that weekend, which is kind of promoting cargo bikes as car alternatives. Folsom to Folsom is our social ride. That's a longer distance. We do social rides every month, usually around 10 miles. This is about a 50 to 60 mile ride to encourage people to explore and push their boundaries. And by going from Folsom Boulevard here in Sacramento to Folsom, the city. Yep, and then we partner with SacRT on that. So if you want to do half the ride and take SacRT back, you have a free pass to bail at any time. And then Film by Bike, showing a collection of short films about cycling. Deb's a judge for that campaign, and so she'll be seeing those films soon. We'll make a selection of which films we'll show. And then Parking Takeover is our decompression session at the end of May's Bike Month. We choose a spot in Midtown, take over about 4 to 5 parking spaces and do some placemaking with bike valet and tents and art bikes and DJs, and just have a party on the street and parking that we pay for. Swag campaign, we've got t-shirts, socks, slap bands, doing musette bags this year, and bike bells. We have some of these items in-house already. The rest are final production is finishing up on them. Should have them shortly, but you'll have socks, bells, and a bandana from last year with the Ready Set Trails, a version of the Ready Set Trails map on it as well. And then a few of our partners are mentioned in there. What you can do to get involved, register for May's Bike Month. Go to maysbikemonth.com. That will get you into our SAC region campaign. Invite your community members, your friends, your office mates. Have an event for your office, spread the word, and most importantly, just ride a bike and have fun. And if you need to contact us, those are email addresses for everybody in the campaign. Thank you very much for your time. And
We're on the sauce. Yeah. Everybody have any questions?
Well, I do have a comment that seems to be appropriate.
Mhm.
Roseville's own Nielsen Palace did
Yes.
win the Tour of Flanders yesterday.
Yesterday was amazing.
So,
Thank you so much.
He's got genetically wired. His parents are Olympians. So
Yep.
It's a promising, for Tour de France.
yeah, both his parents are local too. His mom grew up in Carmichael. I saw the highlights when I got home from work yesterday, and I could not believe it. He took out one of the top teams in cycling and some of their best riders in the final sprint in like the last 300 meters. He also has a teammate, Lachlan Morton, who now lives in the Auburn area. and is an adventure cyclist and has set the record for riding around Australia. Amazingly fast, able to ride for months at a time at a ridiculous pace, and a great community member.
Both the Palaces, Nielsen and his sister are professional bike racers, and we'd love to do some event with them. They're just not here right now.
I'll
There are many races over on the continent.
I'll also throw out that you should have a handout in front of you. Part of the May is Bike Month campaign success really comes from folks in communities and community leaders such as yourselves choosing to volunteer and host events in your community. They can be large and small. Yeah, well, congrats, Director Early, you're ahead of the game. I will be at that kickoff event. SACOG will have a presence there sharing about our Ready Set Trails network and our NorCal Go platform. But I really encourage all of you to maybe partner with a community organization or maybe a local farmer's market or a transit agency. Just, you can think outside the box. There are tons of different event ideas, but those events are really what encourage folks to get on their bike, see what it's like. May is the perfect time to bike in our region. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to myself or anybody from the SABA team who's listed on this slide.
Thank you. Vice Chair Desmond.
Yes.
Thank you. And do we have a link to this that we could use to post on our newsletters? And
Yeah, we can
Okay.
send that to you.
I just want to very quickly use this as an opportunity to give some kudos to Deb Banks and Saba. A small little thing that she did in my district. My daughter is a social worker at a middle school in West Arden Arcade, and about 70% of the student population are refugees, most of whom are from Afghanistan. And she and some of the other the faculty there and the social workers were talking about, hey, the desperate need so many of these kids have for transportation. They need bikes. So I said, who could I contact that might help get some bikes? And I got a hold of Deb Banks, and they just very, very quickly came up with 50 bikes for the school. We need to do a lot more, and I have some discretionary funds that I can use for that purpose, but I have a meaning to reach back out to you. But I just want to thank you, Saba, for the presentation here today, for the swag, and for everything you do to promote cycling, and certainly with an eye towards really the people who are under-resourced and need a lot more help. So I'm so happy to have worked with you and look forward to continuing to do more of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We had a great time doing that. 50 bikes for 50 kids with homeless blocks and lights in 3 weeks at Christmas. Yeah.
Thank you.
And Jeff was very happy with me at the time, maybe, but.
It's all good.
Thank you. May is Bike Month is amazing. I really, really want to say thank you. We just have a little bit of time. We'll be coming back to item 7A in our next meeting. I wanted to know if there were any other matters that anyone needed to bring up for your community. All right.
I have
Yes.
one.
Yes.
Just What do I need to do in order to get West Sac's name put on this thing? Is that, are you already
There's
have
the microphone right here
code
for that.
You are going to be using.
I'll send you an email later today on sponsorship.
Is that what? Okay. Don't play with me.
The A's are there for crying.
Right? I mean, man. Okay, I joke, kind
All
of.
right. To more serious matters, Vice Chair Desmond will be adjourning our meeting today.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I please join me in adjourning today in memory of Officer Osmar Rodarte, who was killed in the line of duty in Marysville on March 26th. I know Director Branscombe had to leave. He and I were talking about this situation, and as you probably all know, you saw it in the media, the officer was involved in serving a search warrant and was shot and killed. Obviously the outpouring of grief and support in the community is profound. And Director Branscombe and I were both almost in tears this morning talking about what is typically a law enforcement thing. When someone was killed in the line of duty, you see just all members of the community, all first responders come out and show their support. And he talked about the procession from the hospital to the funeral home and how there were at least 300 police officer vehicles from various agencies, my former agency, the Highway Patrol. And it's amazing to see a community come together in the wake of a tragedy like this. But Officer Rodarte was young. He'd only been on the Marysville Police Department for 2 years. He was a U.S. Army veteran, leaves behind a wife and 2 kids. And please join me in adjourning today in memory of Officer Rodarte. That we are adjourned.
Thank you. That's really.